Hey there. So we are going to dig into the second half of 1 Samuel 18, verses 17 to the end of the chapter, which is verse 30. This is just going to make some little observations, kind of verse by verse. It's not meant to be a devotional, more just kind of like a gentle commentary. As Hans taught me, it's important to go through all of the scriptures and not skip over, and so I was not able to preach on this or teach on this. And so it's important that I at least give you guys an opportunity to wrestle with it and read it and reflect on it. So let's get into it. I'll just read it and make some comments. Okay, so David has defeated Goliath. He has come home. The women have sang songs about him and Saul. We looked at this that on Sunday, that Saul was jealous. And we looked at that. And so if you want to look at that section, I just encourage you to go look at the live stream that we have on YouTube, which is where you're watching this. That's posted, so I won't really talk about that. But now we're going to look at Saul's attempt to have David murdered through marriage, enticing him with marriage. So it says in verse 17, "Then Saul said to David, 'Here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles.'" Just a comment here. Notice he's invoking God's name the same way the Pharisees will invoke God's name and yet be completely against God's anointed, which is Jesus. And here we just have a paradox. And so just the comment is that many times, and it's tricky, but people around us will sometimes invoke God's name and yet be doing the exact opposite, which is literally trying to tear down God's kingdom. I'm not saying that every person that it obviously invokes his name is, but it's just important to know that, the enemy is really crafty. And so when he's moving around people around us, they will many times invoke God's name and yet do the exact opposite. And so that's what Saul's doing. He's, David loves the Lord. He's trying to compel David, and he's saying, fight the Lord's battles. He's invoking the name, but he's intending to try to destroy David. It says, "For Saul thought, 'Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him.'" This is a brilliant tact. He realizes Saul recognizes everyone around him. The nation loves David. Jonathan loves David. We will see that Michal, his daughter, loves David. And so he's like, the best way to get rid of this kid is just send him into as much battles as possible. And so the more he's on the battlefield, the more likely he is to be destroyed. But of course, as I've said many times, God's sovereignty cannot be stopped and God's plan cannot be stopped. But that's the way he's thinking. And David said to Saul, "Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" So David says, I'm just a lowly shepherd boy. My father is a low clan. Their commentators have many different opinions on this, and it could be all of these or none of these. But the first thing they acknowledge is that it's very possible, and we've seen in David's character, that David is just a humble kid. Even though he's a superstar, has just killed Goliath, is winning all these battles, is now best friends with Jonathan. He's just humble. And so he's hesitant. I should speculate. I'm speculating he's hesitant. Notice he is not jumping at it, saying, "Yeah, oh yeah." And some commentators are saying he's being incredibly calculated, because it's possible that David understands, Saul tried to kill him twice. David maybe suspects that Saul doesn't like him. Maybe it's not just that Saul is tormented and insane, but maybe he recognizes and senses that Saul is trying to destroy him. I don't know. But a good way for Saul to implicate David would be if David jumped at the gun to say, "Yes, I do want to be wed into the family," which is a political move, right? And so Saul could say, "Look, David's trying to take my throne from me, everyone. He really wanted to be a part of my family." I speculate that that's possibly true, because David is a brilliant warrior, and he's a good politician. He's not a great politician, but he's a good leader. And so, who am I? And who are my relatives in my father's clan Israel, that I should be the son-in-law of the king? And it's important to note that David, through his whole life, he will really mess up and make some horrible decisions. And at the end of his life, he will really struggle to be a decisive leader. But he is a humble dude. and that he just recognizes who he is, and he recognizes who God is, and that he, he also, we'll see through the next kind of, I don't know how, I think, a decade or so of his life where he will run from Saul and be out in the wilderness. He continually just says, you know what, I'm going to trust God. I'm going to trust God's hand to move, and rather than assert myself. And that's something that, I've struggled with, but I think I actually grasp pretty well. And just, I don't know if you're one of those people who tend to be just consistently frustrated and trying to make God's will be done around you, but I would encourage you to just, I think of it as like surfing. God is the wave. God is the energy and the force that creates the things around us. And sometimes there's just no surf, and you're just meant to float there and be present and practice paddling, and you got to keep your eyes on the horizon. But you can't surf a wave if there's no wave, and you can't make God's kingdom come. There are a lot of things that God has whispered in my heart that I long to see. I don't really like sharing them just because it feels like a violation of my own intimate relationship with Him. But there are things He's told me that I've been placed to do, and I trust those things. But I have not seen most of them, and but I believe that they will come, and I don't believe that I can force it to happen. I believe that He will make it happen, and so I'm just keeping my eyes on the horizon. And David does this. I experienced this a little bit when I started making music, Christian worship music. I felt like I was writing really great songs, and I did the opposite, which is I tried to assert myself. I put my music out there expecting there to be some kind of response, because actually the first CD I never intended on recording. And then some guy prayed over us after hearing us worship and said, I think the Lord is calling you to record your music, and I think you need to be obedient to that. And I was like, he prayed, and it felt like the Holy Spirit. And I thought, okay, I'm willing to be obedient to that if God wants me to do it, and I did it. And I expected there, something, at least someone to pick up a song or two or something to happen, and nothing in my eyes has happened. And then about a year later, after I made the Red album, which was my second album, I got an Instagram from a Nigerian woman. I know it sounds like a scam, but it was this Nigerian woman who said she had a dream and saw the name Rivers and this red background. And I think she said she saw a hand and a snake, and then she woke up from her dream saying, well, that was weird. I have no idea what that was for. And then she forgot about it, and then in the afternoon realized, I had that dream. And so she Googled it, looked it up, and she looked up Rivers. And I think she remembered my first name too. And then my name popped up, and literally the album art of my last album I made was the album in her dream. And the reason why I know this is real is because she said, no offense, but I don't really like listening. Your style of music is not what I listen to. I have no idea why God put this in my mind, but my son is listening to your music and singing or something like that. And it's completely random. And then I tried emailing her back and saying, try to create a conversation, because maybe God, there was some God was going to move something, and then nothing happened. She never responded. I think because I don't know. But that's just an example of like God showing me that He can assert however He wants to assert whatever I bring to the table. And so here, I know it's a long-winded thing, but I think it's important to just acknowledge where David says, who am I and who are my relatives and my father's clan Israel that I should be son-in-law of the king. He's being just very gracious, and also recognizing that he's saying, I'm not going to assert myself. I'm not going to push myself. I'm going to just serve. And so, trust God to elevate you and lift you up when He wants to elevate you and lift you up. He will. You just have to serve those around you and trust Him. It says, but at that time, Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David. So, but instead she was given to Adriel, the Metholite, for a wife. That would have been shameful in their culture. Their culture is very different than ours. Their shame and honor culture for Saul to say, I'm going to give this my daughter to David as a wife, and then for him to snub David would have made David look lowly. Would have been shown that it would have basically communicated to the culture that David was unworthy, and also that it wasn't a big deal that he was passed over, even though he was told he would be given something. Verse 20, but notice, I should make a comment, David does not retaliate. David could have been resentful about that, and he chooses not to be. David could have been resentful about Saul trying to kill him twice. David is not being resentful. Very powerful message there in just forgiving people. because if you notice, David is continually just fixing his eyes on God. And that's the real way to forgive people, is you gotta if you keep your eyes fixed on the cross and you realize that Jesus died for you and who Jesus is, and that it was your sin that placed him on there, that he went willingly for you, then you can forgive other people. And it's not going to be easy always. Sometimes it will be easy when you fixate on the cross. Other times it's just rough. But David is able to forgive Saul continually. And if you are going to follow Jesus, you're going to have to forgive. Otherwise, you're just going to fall by the wayside, because there are too many people who are going to wrong you. And you're just not going to be able to hang with Jesus. So forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. There's that comment. Okay, verse 20. Keep moving. Keep moving, David. Okay, now Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. Really interesting little Bible factoid in here. This is the only woman in the Old Testament, and I'm not saying the only woman who has love, but this is the only time where the Bible comments on a woman loving a man. Which is crazy, because we will, as we continue forward in this narrative, their relationship will kind of unwind. And it also doesn't say that David loved her, but it's just interesting to note that it says Michal loved David. So she must have really been crazy for him, which is kind of heartbreaking when we look at the way the story continues. But yeah, she loved him. Okay, and so they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So I was talking with Randy, and he was speculating this is a political move, and I agree with him that they keep your enemies closer, right? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. So first Saul is recognizing, well, I'm going to keep him close to me. That way I keep beads on him. We will see later that he will try to use Michal against David. So maybe he's hoping that if he calls her allegiance to the table, she will be able to betray him. That's also a possibility. But we'll see. The real, at least the immediate idea, is that he's going to use this bride price that their culture had as a way to make sure that David died. So he says, make sure that she may snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And Saul commanded his servants, speak to David in private and say, behold, the king has delight in you. Liar. Delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servants spoke those words in the ears of David, and David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I am a poor man and have no reputation? Commentators say, you were supposed to pay a bride price, and David recognizes he's been fighting battles for the king, and he is a champion, but he doesn't have any money. He literally cannot afford to do this. And yet he continues to also be savvy and just say, who am I to be close to you, to be close to your family, and to be elevated? And the servants of Saul told him, and thus so did David speak. Then Saul said, thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price, except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged of the king's enemies. So one commentator was noting, you notice the women were singing today about David bringing in, way more, twice as many as Saul. One commentator speculates that, the unbeliever Gentiles' foreskins was seen as sexually impure. And so he is trying to not only taint David so that women will not find him attractive, right? And not see him as desirable. So there's a possibility of that. The other thing is, this is never mentioned before and will not be mentioned again. So it's very interesting that he wants to do, as asking David to do something grotesque, so grotesque. And, back then, just on a practical note, many times people would bring like the hands of their enemies. Egyptians would cut off their enemy's hands and bring it to prove that they've killed someone. And so David has to prove it, but this is a really grotesque way of doing it. One commentator speculated what Saul is trying to do is that if David does do this, and he doesn't think he will, but if he does do it, it will infuriate the Philistines so much so that they will hate him all the more, and they will see David as, someone with which they must destroy. And so the more the Philistines hate David, the more likely David will be, picked out of the crowd and murdered. The other thing too is that the foreskins was seen as, because it was something that only the Jews did, and they were seen